So Meg, did you want to tell us what you remember from
Sure.
September 11th? I was reading your story today on Facebook, and like I just had tears in my eyes thinking about it. I'd
Yeah,
love
I
to
mean,
hear if
it's
that's what you
it's
say.
still so
It
raw.
was.
It dawned on me before when it hits me every year because my daughter will be 20 and in 8 weeks, and
Yeah.
so when everyone's like,
Wow.
"Oh, can you believe it's been 10 years? Can you believe it's been 20 years?"
Really? Yeah.
I believe it absolutely because I have a marker on my calendar of exactly, when it impacted my life personally. But so yeah, I mean, I was pregnant, very pregnant with Grace at the time, and taking the train from I lived in Summit, New Jersey, and I was taking the train to Lower Manhattan. I worked at Penguin, and so that was on the corner of Houston and Hudson.
Mm.
So after everything happened, that Houston Street was the demarcation line where you weren't allowed to go back into the city below Houston Street. So our offices were closed for a couple of weeks after that. But so yeah, I mean, I had been taking a little easy on myself because it wasn't the easiest pregnancy in the world, and I was super swollen and just a hot mess. I had one pair of shoes that fit me. It was
Oh, wow.
not pretty, and I was late to work. And so I was on the train looking, I took the train from Summit to Hoboken, and then in Hoboken took the path and then got out of Christopher Street and walked a few blocks down. That was my daily commute. And I looked out the window and there weren't that many people on the train because we were like the late goers. We were the lazy bums. And there was smoke pouring out of one of the towers. So that shows you it was, after 8:46. And so we were all like, what do you think that is? Just talking amongst each other. We all started calling whoever we could. So I called Dave. He was home. He worked from home. And I said, you need to turn on the TV. Something's happening. There's smoke pouring out of one of the towers of the Trade Center. And so he's standing in our living room on the phone with me, watching as I'm watching out the window of the train. And right that second, the other tower got hit as we're both like watching it live. Yeah. And so he says, when that train pulls into Hoboken, I don't know what the hell's going on. But you need to come home. Like, just get on the train and come back.
Chills.
So this is exactly what Paula and Darren were saying. Like, you just didn't know what it was at the time, and you thought, I've been to work in weird situations before. I've been to work in blizzards and power failures, and it's not like me to not show up for my people, for my boss, for my employees. So. Yeah. I was like, no, I'm going to go. I'm just going to go and we'll see what this is. I'm sure it's just some freak thing. And so I got to Hoboken and I got on the PATH train and the doors closed. And I thought to myself, like, oh my God, I think I just made the biggest mistake of my life because who knows what's happening in the city and how am I going to get back out? And so I was just very glad that it pulled into Christopher Street and that the doors opened. And then I walked up onto the street into daylight. But, then it was what everybody, what you see on TV. There's no point in wallowing in the like the sights and the sounds of the day, but it was a crazy day. It was really hard to get a phone call out. Everybody was worried about me because I was pregnant.
Sorry. Wow.
So the only way to get out of the city in a moment like that, and in a power failure, terrorist attack, is by boat or on foot. So the whole day became about like, how is anybody going to get out of here? How are we going to safely get to, when I lived in New Jersey, the only way is across the river. The only way across the river is on a boat. And, I had coworkers who walked 100 blocks or over the Brooklyn Bridge and then into the outer boroughs. And so I ended up taking the boat home that day, like way later in the day. I had coworkers who had children working in the towers, who had husbands,
Wow. And Meg, talk a little bit about the people who actually let you get on that ferry.
Yeah. Well, and that, it's funny, like the weird things I remember about a day like that, because I always remember the clothes I was wearing. And I had on all black. And then over the black, I had on like an open button-down shirt, which I never would have taken off. Like I've, walking around with a big giant belly and a black cat suit. But, it was warm and I was pregnant. And so we started walking in this big group to try to get to the boat, which was, far. It was a long walk. We had to walk up to like the 30s. So, if you know Manhattan, that's pretty far. And so there was a lot of people waiting to get on the boat. And everybody, the stories you hear are true. Like everybody was very calm and respectful. And they were, it was peaceful for sure. 2 years later, oddly enough, I was also pregnant with my son, Jack, during the blackout. And that was a different story. People were not very nice.
Oh, no.
Don't believe those stories. But anyway, I got to the ferry and, the line was hours long. And I had just walked 30 blocks and I was very visibly pregnant. And so one of the people that worked at the ferry terminal were like letting me into the front of the line, but I didn't want to go alone. I mean, I obviously wouldn't have been alone on the boat. There were a lot of people, but there were people covered in ash from head to toe. There were people who had, been there in it. Right. And, it was like a war scene. And so I just grabbed this kid who worked with me. He was like 21. I was like, this is my husband and he has to come with me. And so I grabbed this kid, Justin, and I'll never forget him because, he saved himself few hours of waiting online for the boat by pretending to be my husband and my baby dad. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I tend to not like to wallow in the actual memories of it, and rather would instead think about like, what are the takeaways?
Yeah.
Yeah. And there's been a lot. There's been good ones for those of us that were lucky enough to not be like directly impacted that day, for sure. Yeah. I mean, it's weird to be in my shoes because there's a lot of people in my life who like, I'm the closest one they know to who was, to the action. But to me, I always, there was a long time after where I felt like, I don't have a story. Like that's not, because so many of the people that I knew, neighbors, friends, lost people and, I thought this isn't my, like, I don't really have a survivor story, but everybody does.
Do.
Everybody.
Well, and 20 years later, when we watch the imagery and we see the things that we've seen every year for 20 years, people covered in ash, people going for the boat, people walking over Brooklyn Bridge, we can forget that it was a person, you, Meg Walker, pregnant with a daughter who's now 20, right? Like we've seen it so many times that we forget about, or we can until you tell it again. And it goes back to the person, back to the individual.
And of course, I'm thinking about poor Dave at home.
Worried to death about you. Yeah.
And my mom, my grandmother, like everybody was just a wreck. And it was really hard to get a phone call out. Yes, so there was a lot of time that stretched out of where no one knew anything, and so that part was not great. I mean, that was the best reunion ever because I walked to the train from our house in Summit, and he knew at that point that I was what train I was on, so he walked across the park to meet me, and it was like lovers across a cornfield. Like you just couldn't, I couldn't wait to get back to my people, and then. Just the survivor's guilt type of stuff of like all people that didn't have that, and to look at the parking deck at our train station, all the cars that were left. And day, those cars were still there, and every car has a story.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah. And then weeks, like I said, because our offices were closed, and this was there was no real ability to work remotely then. And so the world kind of stopped and we just became obsessed with the news. But, I was going to like pre-K, what are the breathing classes that you take when you're pregnant?
Lamaze.
And I'm like, I said to Dave, like, every day you'd watch the news and you'd cry, and then you'd open the paper and you'd cry. And I said, like, I just started to be worried about, like, what does grief do to a pregnancy, And then, you start thinking, like, what is this world that I'm bringing this kid into?
Yeah.
So there was so much heaviness, but I think, looking back, there were like really valuable lessons too about like never leave without saying goodbye, never leave the house without saying I love you.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And
I also think it's really beautiful that, when you were talking about getting on the boat, you were talking about people helping people and
Yeah.
being good to each other and people letting you go because,
yeah,
you were very, very pregnant. And, it's, I don't know, that's one of the things that always strikes me about these horrific stories is that you
Yeah.
also hear these stories of goodness and of humanity and of the best of people kind of rising to the surface in the darkest times.
absolutely. I mean, and that was all around, and that was overwhelming in its own way, but
Yeah.
it was just really, it's like Mr. Rogers says, right?
That's
Like,
exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah.
they're always there. And there
Find the
was so
helpers.
much goodness and there was so much unity after that, as you remember.
It was, yes.
Yeah, I think people have this image, people outside of New York have this image of hardened, calloused New Yorkers who would step on you to get to a bagel.
Pizza.
It only happens in blackouts, apparently.
I mean, all of those. I mean, there's
Yeah.
such really unfair cliches because I've rarely had anybody in New York be
Yeah.
Being
unkind.
anything
to
but
me.
kind.
Of
Yeah.
course,
Right, and
yeah.
maybe that's because I present as a stupid rube, and they want to help me.
Not at all.
Wow,
You
that's
know,
powerful.
It's
It is.
interesting because I think another stereotype we have is of the French, right? Like you think of
Oh, definitely, yeah.
French people, being insulting to American tourists. It's not a stereotype I've ever experienced, but that's a
Me
stereotype.
neither. Yeah.
But I lived in Paris the summer after that, so less than a year later, and I cannot even begin to quantify the number of people who, when they heard my American accent, came over and put a hand on me
Oh,
or
wow.
squeezed my hands. I mean, it probably numbered in the hundreds. Just hearing my accent, people would come and say, "I'm so sorry for what happened to your country," because it was so fresh in their minds.
Wow.
And I will carry that with me always because
Yeah.
it was just as dark and awful as that time was. I think there was a brief period of time where we were together as a
We were
world.
one. We were one.
I mean, there was truly, I mean, it must have happened over 100 times where strangers in France would hear my accent and come over and say, "I'm sorry," or I hurt for your country, or "I ache for you," or "How are things in America?" It was, and I've never experienced that since. I've been back countless times. It was just in that window of time afterwards where it was still fresh in our hearts and minds. And I don't know, that really meant something.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Oh, sorry.
Meg, I think you're on mute.
My dogs are barking, so I think
Mine
in
were too.
the years since, I would struggle at like on the anniversary and stuff. And what's the right way to what's the right thing to say? What's the right thing to do? And it's for me, it's been different pretty much every year. But like I used to really resent the like never forget all that. And I felt like everyone who wasn't in it would say these what felt old
Like
what felt
cliches.
cliche. And I was like, if you were there, you could never possibly forget. But like, I honestly softened on that over the years because I feel like you have to show people some grace. Like everybody has their own way.
Everybody has a story.
Grieving and of dealing with a horrific occasion. And if for them, it helps to, I don't know why, for some people, it helps to show the horrible pictures over and over again. I just will choose not to look at them. I won't get mad at that anymore. I'm just going to choose not to look at that. But like, everybody's got their own story to tell and their own piece of it. And so, I had friends who I was with a day, who I worked with a day, who are like, I don't go on social media on 9/11. I get mad at everybody. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to, I don't want to wallow. And I think, some years that's what you need to do. Some days that's what you need to do. Some people, that's what they need to do. So just have a little mercy and
a little compassion.
What they want to do. Yeah.
You know what's
Hey,
interesting
Meg.
about that? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask Meg if it's a coincidence that the daughter you were pregnant with
Mm.
is named Grace.
Aw.
I just love that name, but I never made that connection. But
Could have been.
Sweet.
she was the calmest baby too, which I think was just such a blessing because I feel like she came out of the womb just smiling and like Zen in the Buddha pose. Like she never cried. She was so easy. I was like, thank God, I don't think I have it in me to deal with
Yeah.
her.
The Buddha pose. None of my children came out that way. Not one. Not
No.
one. I wasn't willing to try it a fourth time. No way.
It's never too late, Patty.
No, it's like beyond too late. Maybe I know I posted about this, but my son just got a dog. So I have a grand dog and it is a super Zen puppy.
I loved
So
that
there you
post
go.
when you were like, people have posted about their grand dog. And
I'm like, whatever. But I have a Zen grand dog. Does that count?
Yeah,
It
yeah.
does count.
Meg,
It does.
thank you for sharing that. That is
Yeah.
so
Yeah, that was
powerful.
beautiful.
That's
It really
I've
was.
read bits and pieces of it that you've written about, but to hear you narrate
Yeah.
it, like,
Yeah.
whoa,
Yeah.
just like a gut
That's
punch.
incredible. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it helps people to hear some of that. And another thing I was had very mixed feelings about the 9/11 museum and memorial, not the memorial, but the museum.
Mhm.
And I swore I'd never go. I don't need to go. I lived through it. I don't want to see that until my kids were like in middle school. And
Yeah.
they had assignments. Ask somebody who was somehow involved in 9/11, like what their memories are. And so we talked about it, and they heard the stories, and they've heard the stories in bits and pieces over the years. But like when they were both in 8th grade, they did this whole unit on it. And so then they were very interested in going to the museum. So we did do that.
Oh, wow.
And I have to
You
say,
did.
if for anyone who hasn't been, it's certainly not a lovely museum experience. You're not there to admire any beautiful artwork or creativity or, marvel at someone's talent. But I imagine it's similar to the Holocaust Museum where it's a very immersive experience.
It is.
And having lived through that day, I can tell you they bring it back, whether you want this or not, fair warning. I mean, they bring it fully back to life.
Wow.
So,
That's an honoring, though. Just like the Holocaust Museum when I went last month, right? At first, you're like, wait, why would I? And then you realize it's an honoring. Like there is something about,
Yeah.
it's like the books you write, Kristin. It's an honoring. Yeah.
I wish there wasn't a gift shop, maybe, but I think
Yeah.
it's an important thing to see. I think if you want to, and if you're interested in it, it's very well done. And with the four of my family went, and I think do something very happy afterwards. Like we took a walk over the Brooklyn Bridge on a beautiful sunny day and got pizza in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Try to cleanse your mind after. But it is. I'm not mad at the museum anymore. I think.
I'm not mad at the museum anymore.
I think it's an important thing for the future too, because now we have a whole generation of young adults coming who have no memory of that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Who were either too young or weren't born. So
that's why I always thought that museums for them. It's not for people who may have been through it. And then but then to go with my kids and have them ask me questions about it and be able to answer it.
Yeah.
It was a valuable experience. It really was. And so I mean, I think whatever people want to do, whether they want to go or not go, or whether they want to tattoo "Never Forget" on their arm, or post ugly pictures, like whatever it gets you through the day, I respect it. Like to each his own, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Oh, woof. All right, ladies.
Well, what a powerful evening. Meg, I'm so glad you came on and shared that. That was just what an inspiring show tonight. I mean, just
It was.
I'm going to be watching that again.
I was going to say, I'm going to rewatch it for sure. It was awesome.
Yeah, I find it fascinating to hear the stories from behind the camera, because you watch sometimes these, covering Newtown from 9/11 or any of it, like you're human, and to think how that.
And they have kids. Right.
When I was working for People, I covered. Do you remember the Terry Schiavo story? She was
God, yes.
She was on life support that her parents wanted to keep her on and her husband wanted to take her off.
Yep. I
And
remember that.
I was reporting that story for People, and you're supposed to stay detached, right? But it was something that like a lot of cameras were on. And the day that they came out to announce in a press conference in front of the hospital that the court had ruled against the parents and they were taking her off of life support, I burst into tears. I mean, like I had just gotten so invested myself in the story, which you're not supposed to do. Which was all fine that I burst into tears, except that I burst into tears on national television. And so I immediately got a call from my editor saying, could you at least try to appear impartial? I'm like,
Wow.
So it's hard. It's hard when because as a journalist,
I'd be bad at it, obviously.
That was not my strong suit.
Meg, you're Irish. We can't help it.
No.
Nothing we can do about it. And then we turn all red and our faces get all red.
Oh, I get blotchy.
I get blotchy. And it's not pretty. I've never been able to cry pretty.
No, I'm the worst crier and like the most obvious crier too. If I had been a subtle crier, nobody would have noticed, but it was like, yeah.
I don't think any of us are subtle anything, to be honest.
Right. I think that sums it up.
And maybe that's why this is the right career for us, where you can be with your heart, right? Yeah.
All right. Ladies, you're amazing.
All right.
I love you guys.
Thanks, guys. Thanks to all of you out there who stuck with us and stayed and listened. And good night, ladies.
See you next week.
Good night.
See you next week.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Right.